Our main mission is to advocate for the use of seawater desalination. And
California has been at the forefront of desalination in many ways.
our main mission is to advocate for the use of seawater desalination and make for a more water reliable and resilient water system. Colorado River, it can't provide all the water that it was originally meant to.
The sea can be a very inhospitable place.
So how do we define need? How can we all work together? I think we're going to get something done.
Welcome to this episode of the Salty Water Podcast. Today we want to focus on the current status and the future prospects for seawater desalination in California. Of course, California is the most populous state in the U.S. with a population of 40 million people. And much of California, especially in the south, is considered a semi-arid desert and very water scarce. And as a result, there's a very complex system of both state and federal water projects that have historically provided water resources, including from the Colorado River and from Northern California. California has 840 miles of coastline on the Pacific Ocean, and so seawater desalination seems a logical option for water resources officials, elected leaders, and local utilities to consider. So what's happening with desalination in California? Well, today we're fortunate to have the one person who's perhaps best positioned to bring us up to date and answer some basic questions on this topic, and that is Mark Donovan. Mark's day job is as a principal with the global engineering firm GHD, where he is the lead for the firm in desalination and water reuse in North America. Mark is also chairman of the board at CalDesal and has been on the board of CalDesal since 2014. Tell us a little bit, Mark, about your origin story. Welcome to the podcast, and how are you today?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Eric. I'm doing very well.
So I've known you professionally since we both worked at Hatch together about 15 years ago. You have a chemical engineering degree from the University of New Hampshire. You've done graduate work in environmental and chemical engineering, as well as physical and chemical oceanography. You've been practicing engineering in the desalination and water reuse space for 30 years. Tell us what motivated you to get into this career in water. Was there a mentor, person, or experience that had a major impact on your career choice?
You know, it's interesting. You know, growing up in coastal Massachusetts, I always had a healthy respect for the ocean. It's been a big part of my family growing up. My grandfather worked at a local shipyard. My sister and I worked summers in a local seafood restaurant. The ocean has always been providing for my family and part of our family dynamic for a long time. So going through engineering school, after I graduated from University of New Hampshire, I ended up in San Diego and was hired on by Desalination Systems at the time, and shortly acquired thereafter by Osmonics, and then they became GE. As part of that role, I was an application engineer, and one of my assignments was to develop a new seawater desalination membrane. So I was lucky enough to be stationed down at Scripps Institute of Oceanography for a while, setting up a pilot unit, and then was able to then travel around the Caribbean doing other types of systems for Osmonics, and that's kind of where I got hooked on the seawater desalination game and been in it ever since.
That's interesting. You know, California has been at the forefront of desalination in many ways. The early research and development for membrane separation technology took place at UCLA. In the early 1990s, Santa Barbara was an early adopter, motivated by drought at the time. Many of the membrane manufacturing companies over the years have been headquartered or located in Southern California. And many of the technical pioneers and innovators like Dave Furukawa and Rhodes Trussell and many, many others have been based in California, yet the topic remains controversial in California. Tell us, what is CalDesal? What is the mandate? And why did you get involved in this organization?
So CalDesal is an advocacy group. So based in Sacramento, our main mission is to advocate for the use of seawater desalination and brackish desalination in the state to help bolster water supplies and make for a more water reliable and resilient water system. So we are primarily a advocacy group to promote seawater desalination and liaise with the regulators and legislators to help make that happen.
And how is that going? I mean, what do you find? I know California is known for its highly regulated structure on environment and water issues. Public perception has been a factor in many of the projects, as we all know. So what's gaining traction? What's working? Where do you see the state of public perception in California on seawater
Yeah,
desalination?
it's interesting. I would say public perception as a whole is actually quite favorable. A lot of the local projects, as they're going through the development, I'll take Doheny Desal, for example, with South Coast Water District. South Coast embarked on customer polling a few years ago as part of the development of the project. And it receives wide public support, north of 75% for supporting these types of projects. And as part of those surveys, they also do what we call a willingness to pay survey. How much are you willing to pay above your current monthly water bill for a more reliable and resilient water supply? And time after time, the general public is very supportive and willing to pay for this drought-proof water supply. I kind of refer to as the silent majority, unfortunately, gets drowned out by the vocal minority, with these environmental groups and NGOs who just frankly have a lot of misconceptions about the environmental impacts associated with seawater desal. It's unfortunate. We do our best to try to educate them and have ongoing dialogue with them, whether it's their anti-growth sentiment or their, I don't know, lack of true understanding on the impact, the lack of impacts on seawater desal. I think
Right.
that's part of the problem.
And that continues. It's not, you see it ebbing and flowing, or is it just a constant backdrop to the project development phase?
It seems to be a constant backdrop. There have been some innovations recently to try to combat that. I'm sure a lot of the listeners here will be familiar with companies like Oceanwell or Onika, who are trying to move the desal process offshore. Right. In the case of Oceanwell, Robert Bergstrom, to his credit, thought about, okay, specifically, how do we get around the constraints of seawater desal, specifically in California? So his kind of deep sea subsurface concept, kind of helps get around some of the energy consumption pushbacks, some of the impacts associated with intake and brine discharge. So we'll see where that goes. One of the things that CalDesal is trying to push through right now is there's kind of a overarching document called the California Ocean Plan, which dictates and spells out a lot of the constraints around seawater desal. That's going through another revision process right now. So CalDesal is actively engaged in that process to make sure we don't get further constrained and further hamstrung by onerous regulations in the California Ocean Plan.
Okay. Let's switch gears for a minute. Carlsbad is a big success story. I mean, it was many, many years of permitting and I think litigation, but it's been operating for about 10 years now, providing 50 million gallons per day of potable public water supply to the San Diego Water Authority. Can you give us an update on this project? Is it meeting its contractual obligations? Has it had any challenges over the years? And what has it done relative to public perception? Has it altered acceptance, like having seen something that actually is delivering on its obligations?
Yes, Carlsbad's doing great. I think it's a great story. CalDesal often touts the successes of the Carlsbad project. Yeah, as a large scale project, which is what the state needs going forward. Smaller projects like Monterey and Santa Barbara and Doheny Desal are great, but to really make a meaningful impact in the state and Colorado River, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit here, we need these larger, open intake type seawater desal projects. Carlsbad's been great. I know a lot of lessons have been learned there, how to deal with some challenging water quality conditions. Algae blooms are always tricky with seawater desalination projects and plants. So a lot of lessons learned, but a lot of great things coming out of the Carlsbad project.
That's good. Any plans to expand that project, or is San Diego happy with the mix of water supply sources that it has?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that leads into an interesting thing we're seeing in the water segment in the West right now, specifically around Colorado River users and those Western states. Right. So as everyone knows, the Colorado River, it can't provide all the water that it was originally meant to, whether that's for one reason or another. We won't get into that. So San Diego County Water Authority is embarking on a very ambitious program to work with other states and work out water exchange programs. So California could leave some of our water in the Colorado River. In exchange, some other states could help make investments in seawater desalination or maybe potable reuse to generate a local supply that California can use. And then we could leave some of our water in the Colorado River. So yeah, potentially Carlsbad could be expanded a little bit if that gains some traction and picks up steam.
I believe there are a couple of smaller scale projects in the pipeline or being developed. Can you address what's sort of happening in real time with, I think, Mid-Coast area, a couple of projects in the works?
Yeah, Central Coast, Monterey is still advancing their desal project. Both Monterey and Doheny, I kind of call them sister projects because they're both using, subsurface slant well intakes and then both disposing of their brine commingling through existing wastewater outfalls, which
Okay.
actually were the preferred methods in the old 2015 California Ocean Plan desalination amendments. So those two
Okay.
projects have been moving along at a pretty good clip. Doheny is slated to begin construction in the fall, assuming we can get approval of the final guaranteed maximum price. So Doheny is being delivered with a progressive design, build, operate, maintain model.
Okay.
So we're working through the pricing right now and waiting for South Coast and its partners to approve that price, and then hopefully construction will start in the fall.
Talking about the 2015 plan, and when you talk to state regulators and state policymakers, notwithstanding sort of these site-specific, approval issues, siting requirements, in the big picture, as they look at the overall long-range plan for California, where do they see desalination fitting in? I mean, do they acknowledge and understand that it's a viable source and it's drought-proof? Are they open to reasonable requirements going forward?
I think they are. Governor Newsom's been pretty clear that he does want seawater desalination part of the water supply portfolio. Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, has been a very big supporter. We meet with him regularly as CalDesal. I think from a policy perspective, they're willing and wanting to move these things forward. It's just us working out the minutia of the regulatory current constraints. We're trying to make it clear that at the state level, they should not be dictating a local project's need, or they should not be saying, is the project affordable or not? That's the local water district's purview. So we're just trying to work with the state to really get different agencies and whatnot to kind of stay in their lane, so to speak. And we're also trying to get them. We just had the CalDesal conference up in Sacramento a couple of weeks ago. It was great. We had some regulators there. We had folks from different states there. And the message is really we need to broaden that lens of how do we define need. It's not just a local coastal town that needs the water. It's how can we all work together and work these innovative exchange programs to develop seawater desal on the coast and then get workout exchange programs for moving water around the state.
Yeah.
On Doheny, for example, it's South Coast Water District, who's primarily provides water to Dana Point and surrounding communities. Then there's Laguna Beach County Water District, who's just a little bit to the north. They could get wet water. But another partner is actually a district called Eastern Municipal Water District. So they're about 50 miles inland. So while they wouldn't see wet water, there's a water exchange program that strengthens Eastern's reliability by partnering on a seawater desalination project in the coast. This is very new in California, and that this would be the first one where it's been implemented. So I think that will actually open up some doors for seawater desal in the state. We get some interagency cooperation.
So that's interesting. So you're seeing flexibility and adoption and sort of working interesting new ways to make the intergovernmental and the utility cooperation work. That's interesting perspective.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit pioneering, but I think we'll get there. Yeah.
Well, good. You mentioned Bergstrom and the offshore. I mean, you've been around the business for a while now, and you've seen things come and go. And what is your professional view? I mean, to me, I think it's an interesting idea, but the sea can be a very inhospitable place, and especially the deeper you go, and especially in the cold, rough waters of California. But, in your professional sort of view, do you think it's worth the investment? And do you think there's a likelihood that something could develop that's realistic and commercially viable there with the offshore?
I think so. Robert's put a good team around him. They got a lot of offshore expertise. I think there's a lot that can be borrowed from the oil and gas industry, in that subsea environment that could make this work. But you're right, the devil will be in the details and some of that long-term O&M and see how that all shakes out and see how the cost of water ultimately shakes out.
Yeah, I think I don't know if his specific project is part of the X Prize, but I think there are a number of offshore. I think the Norwegians have one that may be in the next round of X Prize going forward. So very, very interesting. So we're kind of coming toward the end of our time today, but can you sum up your view of optimism? Sort of where are you on the scale of 1 to 10 of desalination, seawater desalination being sort of more accommodated and mainstreamed into the water supply puzzle of California as we go forward?
Yeah, I'm definitely a glass half full guy. So I'm going to give myself a 7.5 on the good side. I think we're going to get something done. I'm confident Doheny and Monterey are going to come through, but then I'm confident also that we're going to get some larger scale desal projects going with this kind of broader need and some interagency support.
Well, that's really good to have an optimistic note. I've watched California for a long time and a very interesting market. And to me, it just makes sense. So thank you so much, Mark, for your time and contributing today. And I want to thank you very much and appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Eric.